noticing the oneness of life is kind of a bit of a conundrum. I was actually meditating this afternoon, and this just sort of came up, just drifted in, because the idea of the noticing automatically sort of contracts back into a point of view that needs to be noticed from. So actually, and I remember this a few years ago. I was just walking in the field, and I was, going through lots of inquiry and self-inquiry after doing a lot of meditation. I was thinking, okay, I've heard all this stuff, so I was fully seeking to try. I didn't realise what seeking was, by the way. I never really heard the term, but I was looking across and I was thinking, the birds are over there, and I'm one with them, and they're one with me, and I'm one with the grass, and I'm one with nature. And how do I get to be one with that? And it's constantly like the whole trick was the mind was still thinking from the perspective of a separate self, that I, separate me, need to be connected to that somehow. And if I could just notice it as one thing, that'd be really great. That'd be great. And I don't know when that happened, but that just seems to change, whereby that and this just was. And that's all that's needed. It's actually not noticing. It's not noticing the oneness of life. The oneness of life just is. And this is an expression of the same thing as that is. So it's all one expression happening in different forms. This is a human body with mental processes, and so it doesn't seem to be known. It's not a known concept. It's just that I don't know the others here, but when you walk in nature, or just basically, we take most of humanity that's walking around, and they have moments of kindness and joy and love and recognition of others, supposed others. And I think what's going on with when the human being recognizes another, or feels love or connection with another, or notices the beauty of nature, a beautiful forest or a sunrise or anything, the ocean, there's just this dropping of this feeling of separation. And the feeling of separation is really just in the head anyway. It's just a mental process. It's connected physiologically and trapped in my energies and emotions anyway. But it's a thought process that I'm separate from that. And it's such an instinct. It's almost like it's still a thought, but it's more like a visceral instinct. It becomes an instinct. It's been ingrained for so many years. A whole, decades of lifetime has ingrained this automatic reaction that I am separate me, I am separate self. This is my human existence, my body, my life, and it's different from everything else. There's a flow of intelligent life with its uniqueness appearing this way, and there's uniqueness. There's unique appearances of life. They're beautiful, beautiful, beautifully unique appearances of this, in biology, of this intelligence. And often, I think we've talked about this, Jane, oftentimes when people are sort of starting to look into non-duality, it's like, I don't know about this. I don't want to be an I business anymore. I kind of like being, I don't want to lose being I, because I like parts of this I experience. You don't say it, but people say, I like being me. That still happens. It's life is expressing that way, but so it's not going to change. The only thing that changes is the contracted story that says I'm a separate me, and I got to do it this way, and I should have done it better, and I have guilt and shame and worry and stress and fear and all these other things. Apart from the biological instincts, they happen, but the psychological suffering that is spawned from this idea of being a separate I, and how it all has to control life, which is impossible because it itself is an appearance. It's not a real entity. It's not an object. I isn't an object. I is a thought. I is a bunch of perpetuated thoughts, and a thought can't actually do anything. A thought can only be a thought and interact as a thought. So I should have done this better and gone through life and interacted and talked and said and done these things better, or I should be a better me. It's so confusing because there is no resolve to that. That is a thought process, and a thought isn't an object, and an object is what is needed to do, supposedly do things if you are a separate me, separate entity. But it's not. It's completely all connected. This is all connected. These beings, these human beings that are interacting here is the one. It is the one life interacting. The only thing that's happened is it's coalesced energy as a dense matter in form here that is communicating with other forms that have been spawned in this one connected soup. It's impossible to explain, but it's like watching. I had this image of you know, when have you ever seen one of those boards that they put a violin bow on sand on a board, okay, and it creates a resonance, and the resonance creates patterns, and the patterns change as the bow moves around. So there's different harmonics that happen, and those harmonics create condensed form. That's what human beings and form and life and animals and nature feels like. It's just vibrating resonance coming into form. But it's far beyond my understanding as this human being. It feels like all of this is just resonating form that's appearing this way, and the intelligence of how that comes together. You know, this human mind won't get that, won't grok that, as they say. It's beyond that. So noticing the oneness of life is really the opposite way around. It's allowing life to be exactly what it is, and in that allowance, it is connected already. The only thing that's separating it is the mental concepts of being separate I, the separate identity that when looked for isn't found. The sensations of feeling like a separate I are also an appearance. It's not exactly an emotion, but it could be likened to emotion because it's a thought. Thoughts and emotions, they're all intermixed, intertangled energy anyway. Emotions and energy trapped in the body and cellularly in the memories of the body. It all interacts. But the idea of an I, the idea of I, this I that I refer everything from, is like an appearance. It's like an appearance of thought. And it's so ingrained, it just keeps doing itself. And we are taught all of our lives that this is the way it works. I am looking out, and everything happens after that first assumption that I am here and I'm separate and I'm observing and I'm doing. And you know, a lot of spirituality will play in that middle ground, and there is nothing wrong with any of these things, by the way, because this is all life doing this. Life is playing this way. Life is playing in the middle ground. Life is playing completely identified and running around doing life just the way most human beings do it. It's just me and them, enemy. You know, I've just got to gather more resources, whatever I've got to do, get more money, have sensation over it, but it's all tangled, it's all twisted, but it's all life doing that, so it doesn't matter. Just something happens if this I identity is looked at and discovered to be actually a fluid vapor of thought that allows whatever's here as this life, as this human being expressing in life, to just flow with its talents, creative input, interactive, whatever it's offering to this universe. It's allowed to just do what it does because it's no longer blocked as this entity that has all these self-limiting beliefs, and it just holds itself distracted and distracted in itself. You know, it's the greatest joy and the greatest confusion. It's just that there is a lot of suffering in humanity. There is a lot of suffering, and it's just created in this idea of a separate self, this perpetuating idea of separate self, and that separate self isn't one with all of this, but it absolutely is. You know, everything is just vibrating intelligent energy, patterning and forming. As I always use this quote, and I'll give Sailor Bob Adamson the credit: patterning, shaping and forming. It's just intelligent energy patterning, shaping and forming. And human beings are that as well. But we have thought processes that really are so believable, and we've grown and we've been indoctrinated with them, with our families and schooling, society, and all these things just say, this is you. This is how it works. You are separate. You really are separate. But if it's looked into right back at the start, who really am I? And the instinct will always go, well, I do this and I do that and I that, and it's always there. But it's just gently looking back, and it feels like life has this unique, spontaneous, intelligent blossoming. Always doing this. There's no cause and effect. If you try and make a reason out of it as a human being, as a supposed separate mind, there's intelligence happening here, there's interactive intelligence, but the intelligence that's happening here, the awareness that is actually interacting through these sense organs, this perception, this mind, is actually the whole, is the one. This is just a node of perception. It's a node of perception of the same thing. And that's the difficult thing for the separate self-mind to let go of. It doesn't really like that, because the whole instinct for survival, biology, is built into this being something separate and special and living and alive. And because the thought process has been so assumed for so long that I do this and I am that and I've got, that's that assumption of thought of I, that entity, that form, that object. It's just assumed. It's as assumed as the feeling of being a separate body, but it's not real. It's an assumption of thought. And to balance back that it's not life doing anything wrong, it's life doing all of this. It's just that life somehow is doing this, and in some human beings, it's also realizing that it is this. It's the same thing. It's the intelligence looking at itself, playing as a separate form, but it's not really a separate form. It's having the experience of being a separate form. So actually, you don't need to notice anything. It will notice itself when the separation is let go of. Because the recognition that human beings have when they see other human beings and just have this feeling of unconditional love, which happens in so many human beings. There's so many moments in all human beings. There are moments when there's recognition of beauty or love. That really is when the thought process of being separate isn't creating that separation, that distance. It's just seeing itself and rejoicing in itself, loving itself. Not love as an object to an object, but really just in harmony. The conditioning that still happens in a human being, this node of life. This is a node of completely connected life. That's everything, every air molecule, everything. Probably everything that we can't even perceive as human beings through these senses as well. So it's like it's infinitely open. And the conditioning that happens in a human mind, if it's looked at, it's part of this life expressing. It's just their appearances, there are thoughts, there are things, there is this energy, but it's not the human mind that's doing it. It's the human mind that is interpreting it. But with what we could call conditioning, it's an important thing to look at as far as this openness becoming sort of an abiding openness. The conditioning that happens in a human mind still happens here, but it looks like they're just appearances. And it also, if you think about memories, when they talk about memories, people say, apparently every time you recall a memory as this human biology, this is human form through the brain and the memory and the brain and the cells, that however memory is captured and held and formed, every time a memory is activated, it actually opens the memory, looks at it a certain way, and then it rewrites it. It rewrites it every time a memory, an old memory or an old trauma is accessed. It opens it, rewrites it, and completely distorts it. It's not even the same. It's not even the same information, apparently. And I look at conditioning being the same way. So why in these meetings, when we discuss this sort of things and something loosens up and a little bit of a different perspective opens and settles into the thinking mind, the subconscious mind perhaps, it's kind of like drawing a memory up, seeing it. So conditioning comes up. It might be old traumas or suffering or whatever it might be. It might be unpleasant human experience. Let's just call it suffering. Fear, anxiety, guilt, worry, shame. All of these things might appear. As they appear, and it's learnt, it's almost like this biology, this conditioned human being learns as intelligence to then go to look at it and go, I don't need to do anything with that. It's not really me anyway. These are just appearances. They're energetic appearances. And if they're opened and let be and fully allowed, it's not an action, it's more just, there it is, nothing. There it is, there's nothing. And there can be intense pain, psychological, this emotional pain can appear, can be terrible, like it would seemingly unbearable to the thinking mind, seemingly unbearable. But as that's allowed to just express and burn itself out really, without feeding back into it, resisting it, trying to put it away, find a solution, make it better, do it a different way, just allowing it to express. It kind of rewrites the conditioning. So the conditioning gets rewritten in the background. This is a sort of, I can't really explain. This is very new. This is a new thing that's seeming to be unfolding all the time. And as that conditioning is rewritten, it is this intelligence, this open, vibrant life intelligence, awareness, whatever, through the biology, through this human being, rewriting the conditioning of this node, this interactive node. It's rewriting itself. And each time it rewrites itself without having to react to that, it feels like, if you're going to put it in certain terms, healing that. And this isn't healing it for me. This isn't healing it for me, because I'm just part of this. I am the experience. I am the appearance of thought. It's really just another energetic appearance, this I that I'm referring to. So I that I'm referring to is the whole. So all humanity is really this beautiful, intelligent, energetic universe, whatever we want to call it, God, life form, whatever you want to call it. They're all interconnected. They're all just one words, but it's appearing. Things are happening, and it seems to be learning to heal itself. So in the blossoming of humanity and what's happening and all the experiences that are happening, which is just infinitely spontaneous, polarities and contrasts happen. Experience happens, joy happens, blind identification happens in the game of mind. It's all fine, doesn't matter, it's all life doing what it's doing, playing, calling. I'm just using words to explain things that could be looked at a different way. So as I've said many times, once this is finished, all we're doing is playing with words to massage a different way for the mind to operate, but it's really deeper. It's really just letting itself open, And really what we're doing is we're just playing with the concepts that seem so solid and real, so that they actually don't look so real anymore. And in that, there's just a diminishing of the separation, of the objectification, of the identification of all this play of thought. And these are almost like tricks for the mind to be tricked out of holding on to. That's another way I'd put it. So there's nothing misleading or deceiving here. This is open, honest looking in. But there's something about this acceptance of whatever's happening as it is, because there isn't separation, because there's no one actually separate doing anything, that allows the conditioning to be rewritten. And as the condition is almost rewritten each time, it becomes subconscious, it becomes part of the background, and there's just a more peaceful flow of life happening. And there might be still contraction into being I've got to be God, I'm separate, and business and life and all these things make me feel this way. I'm separate. I've got to do these things. But actually, there's also this understanding always in the background that that's really just the appearance. It's just like that's what happens to the actor on the stage. That's the play. It's not really what's here. But there'll be a lot of non-duality that says, okay, there's no separate self. There's nothing happening. And that's it. And all of this is all just, this is all just mind stuff, and it's not real. So, it's not said really, but it's almost like, so this kind of should be happening a different way where you're not really there, and nothing is happening and nothing's real. I would say life is blossoming in all these different ways. The only difference is, and it's blossoming as unique human expressions everywhere. The only thing that's different is this identification about being a separate I that's just a thought process can relax, and the rest of it just happens vibrantly. There's nothing separate. It's all just connected energy. That's for sure. Or that's this, as I've said before, nothing's for sure. But as a way of saying it, even scientifically, if you can imagine all this is just vibrating energy. Everything is just vibrating energy. And somehow it comes in to human form here, plant form. It knows what to do. The intelligence of life in plants and nature and insects and bacteria, it knows exactly what to do. There's no one running it. There's no little person running that as separate amoebas or separate snails or separate trees that seem to know how to grow themselves. They're just happening.
I love what you say about how it's all flipped around, and rather than noticing the non-reality of the separate self, it's more the separate self is noticed, but nobody notices it.
When this separate self is not noticed, but the other way, when the separate self stops being like that, there's almost a release of energy. It's kind of like just operating in society activates it a certain way, especially when the habit patterns and conditioning have been so ingrained over decades. So it just activates a certain way. And then if there's some time for meditation and just sitting and doing nothing, not trying to fix anything, it's just being, without anything else having to happen, there's like a release. It's like I would equate it to something I heard hang gliders talk about, actually. Hang gliders talk about when there's, the people that do, I did a paragliding course overseas years ago, and they all talked about, this is I don't know where this is coming from, they all talk about the heat of the day heats up the vegetation, and it all stays that way. So the vegetation and nature gets heated up, and it stays that way until a certain time of day when there's a temperature change and the pressure's off. I guess the pressure in the sky is off, because the heat's changing. And then all this bubbles of hot trapped air from the vegetation, from nature, release at the end of the day. And that release creates uplift. And when we're doing this course, that uplift is what everybody wants. That release of that energy is like when the lid's taken off, the natural trapped energy from the contracted ideas that have been happening just release. And oftentimes there'll be meditation in a completely not a blissful state or not a sad state, definitely not, but there'll just be tears from the release of whatever energy's been activated in this body during a day or a week. It's amazing. And once again, it's there's just a noticing that that's happening. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just, wow, that's just what this body's doing at the moment. There's no recollection of that energy being trapped, because it's all tangled in the subconscious processes, the conditioning processes of this human body and mind. But it's quite amazing that it's sort of, every time, the trick is, every time this organism, this separate person, supposed idea here, thinks there's been some change, it's reminded of the fact that it's very much human. There's so much humanity still happening. And that contrast, that interest, that it seems to be like almost like more celebrated. The blossoming of life is more celebrated when it sees the complexity of how it's interacting. So all of the quirky character traits that one might wish as a ultra spiritual, evolved person, it doesn't matter. None of it's important. It's actually anything like that is conceptual anyway. So it's just like these things open up, and then there's just more celebration, and then all the imperfection just seen as like, wow, that's what this human body and mind have been conditioned to feel through this life. Look at that. I really didn't think that was still there. It's coming again. There it is. And so all of those things are almost loved. There's just such kindness for what we would call in human separation form terms for the imperfections. The imperfections are just absolutely beautiful. The imperfections are loved as part of this expression. I think there feels like there's an impulse of nature to try and let those go. But if they appear, and there can be resistance, even appearing to that, there can be momentary resistances. Oh, it shouldn't be like that. But then there's like, oh, that's right. Look, you're doing that as well. So it's all just thoughts. All just thoughts. All of this is thoughts. There doesn't have to be any solution to any of this apart from noticing. But once again, the noticing is more like awareness noticing itself rather than a separate self noticing, what it's doing and what that's doing. That's that openness that sort of dissolves into itself. It's a word noticing. It's more like innate, open intelligence noticing without any source. The source feels like it's there. The source is an appearance. The entity of I is an appearance. And as I keep saying, I got halfway through saying before, probably for Jane, because we had this original discussion about entity and I like being I, the I feeling can be intense and as beautiful, because the I feeling is an appearance. The only bit we're trying to look at here is the I feeling actually an object, an entity, a real entity, or is it an appearance in the flow? It's an appearance in the flow. It's an energetic appearance in the flow of a thought of being a separate I. And when we don't look at it and we get so used to it, it's been so perpetuated for so long, it becomes like an object and a separate object. And it's not there. It really isn't there. But the appearance, the unique expression of that human being, with all its mental faculties as a node of interaction, is there. The idea that you'll hear a lot in some of these discussions is there's no one there. There's no one there. So stop thinking there's someone there. You've got to get rid of it to make it no one. And there's nothing happening, and all of these things. There's no separate thing happening, as we've talked about before. There's no separate thing happening because nothing is separate. Everything is interconnected. Everything is the same. Intelligent energy blossoming in different forms and shapes, but it's all one energy, interconnected and expressing in all different ways. The only thing that feels separate is the thought process that says this biology is separate. I am separate. And we're just looking at that because that's just such a small part of all this, by the way. Such a small part of it, but it is the part that seems to create a lot of suffering in humanity, which is why there seems to be so much looking into it, but there's so much complexity. The idea of I, when that falls away, when the reality of that is seen as not real, it's not true, that's one thing. And it's a huge opening in this mental confusion that happens as part of human life in the intellect of humanity. It's like humanity's blossomed in a different way to plants and animals and whatever. This is just such a limited view, by the way. Who knows what's happening in the rest of the universe? Could be different creatures in all different realms that that seem more evolved and have already seen all of this stuff and gone, yeah, of course, this is a node of the same thing looking at itself playing as this feeling of a separate I, separate human being. It's wonderful. And then there might be an evolution where all humanity sees that it is the same and works in cooperation. But for now, one thing that can be looked at is, yes, is the separate self I a real object, a real entity? If it's not a separate entity, how can it actually do anything? How can it actually find a better version of itself when it's invented itself in the first place? How can it play in that middle ground where this is play in the middle ground where it says, I'm going to do this and I'm going to be better at that and I'm going to manifest and I'm going to be... All of these things can happen, but they're happening from an original entity that is actually a fantasy. It's a very strong word, fantasy. I'm almost reticent to say it because some people will just go, yeah, that's enough. I'm out of here. I don't need to hear that. Don't dare take a me away from myself. I like being a me because it's a primal instinct. I need to survive. I'm me. I don't want to look at me's. I will just stop there. That's okay. It's okay. It doesn't matter. It's just that we're having an open discussion here. And playing. We're playing. This is part of life playing. Just part of life playing. And whatever comes through this human being is also interpreted. It's probably conditioned. It's probably conditioned somehow. I learned English, Australian, as my language of communication, as this human being. Well, that's a set of rules in itself. So there's just an interaction. There's just open interaction here. It becomes like thought can't design what's talked about feels like from no agenda. That sort of seems to be when the unknowable just opens. Once again, it's in words. The words are just a tickle. The words are just breaking down the structures, looking at the structures a different way. Because the structures, the contraction is what's not needed. And life's doing it. It's not wrong. Life's making the appearance of that spontaneous idea of I appear. It's not wrong. It's just life blossoming and playing, doing it all different ways. But when it seems to settle and that idea of being separate sees the rest of what's going on around it, it doesn't seem to feel like it's noticing. It just is celebrating of itself. And that is joy. That is unconditional love. That is recognition. And that recognition is so peaceful. That's tears in the eyes. It's just the body reacting when it just gets into this shock of all that other stuff wasn't needed. It's just the body releases this trapped energy. How are you going, Jane? I'm not going to put you on the spot. Just feel like I'm doing all the talking tonight.
I'm fascinated at how different my experience has been every single time I've come to these sessions. How what you're talking about breaking down, something has broken and dropped away. And like you earlier on, or for the few days, I've very unusually been feeling totally empty. I've been functioning well with what I have to do, and then had sort of like a lack of interest, but I haven't fought it and I haven't tried to be otherwise. it's been a difficult experience, and part of me wondered about how to turn up for this, because like you, I like to bring my best, bring something that at least can make a difference. But I did also decide just to turn up and know everything was going to be exactly as it needed to be. But my experience today, strangely, as I've been listening, and you've been talking about separation, is an experience of more separation, not less. I can see you all there, I can sense you, I can see the loving essence of you, and I feel like somehow I'm locked inside and I'm just allowing it. I feel as if my experience is more heart and here, whereas normally I've been doing a lot of listening. It's like I've dropped somehow. I can only tell you how it feels in this moment. But there is a sadness as if I'm separate, and I'm just letting it be, and I'm listening, and I'm trusting it's just how it's meant to be.
This, I can totally relate. This has all happened here as well. Nothing's wrong. There'll just be times when the mind is trying to wrangle it a different way. If there's a change happening, if there's sort of a loosening of the idea of a separate self that's always been there, you know, this, we've been talking for a few weeks on and off, and you'd probably be living your life as well. It would be almost cathartic if all this changed all at once. So I don't know how the Jane personality and character operates. You know, we've had a lot of really nice discussions. But what can happen to a lot of people who are going through this sort of change in perspective is the separate self structure will try every angle, every which way to maintain itself. And it will feel like, I feel really sad about, you know, the fact that I feel so separate. But that in itself, there is a noticing. Using the word noticing, it might be a bit confusing. There's just awareness of the fact that that might not be real. That thought process is seen for what it is. And now the ego, I don't like using that word much, but the ego, this separate self mind structure, will hijack that and then use that to create sadness, which will create contraction and feeling of separation again. But who is actually feeling sad? Sadness is appearing. You said it beautifully, actually. I'm just allowing it to be. Well, you're not really allowing it to be. It's just happening. It's just a way we communicate. So I'm not trying to say that was the wrong way to say it. I'm just saying that's the way we communicate. But just as a play of words, there is just allowance of that to be what it is, as sadness. If that sadness is just allowed to be and not tried to fix it, or the idea that separation has still happened is just allowed to be that, and you're not trying to fix it, there's just a noticing or awareness of it. That's it. That's all. Because what that does is it does it to itself. This awareness, this infinite intelligence that's going on here, knows how to heal itself. It knows, and it seems to have a compulsion. It seems to have a movement or a momentum towards that being harmonized. So you don't need to do anything. It's quite amazing that noticing is going on. Because before you came to these groups, or we just started, whatever, that may not have been on your radar, the radar there of that human being, that node of life, that perspective, looking into this to itself. That's already happening now. So it's causing some, you know, I don't really want to let go of that. There's sadness. Oops, I can feel how separate, I can feel this separation. That noticing in itself is enough for this to keep unfolding. However it unfolds. There's change. Everything's always changing, by the way, so it's inevitable. but at least there's some momentum in this direction. I would say that's not necessarily, I mean, nothing's a bad thing. Really, nothing's a bad thing. But I think the fact that you know how to, as Jane, you know how to just allow and feel that and leave that open, allows itself to burn itself. But with that, because we're having we're having discussions here, which uses the mind and thought, and admittedly that's another thought process. But this is the intelligence of life doing all of this. So if the intelligence of life has been stirred up a little bit and it's starting to look at, I shouldn't feel separate anymore because now I know that it's sort of a thought, what's the way out of this? How does this get fixed? This is all sort of all over the place now. Great. You don't have to do anything, and you don't have to know anything. You don't have to fix anything. There's nothing to do. It's doing it itself. You're not doing anything anyway. You're an appearance in it. So enjoy that. Feel that. You don't have to enjoy the discomfort, but it can be sort of appreciated as a beautiful, vibrant expression that's happening. If it can be even remotely grasped or allowed as that, and once again, it's not you allowing, it's just this. It's very confusing to use these words because we're communicating as human beings, and we're talking about something that is actually, I'm not a separate person talking to you, really. And yet, in society, this is how we operate. I've got a name and I'm over here and I've got a different computer. That's what it feels like. But this is one interconnected life playing in itself, tickling in itself, interacting with itself. In that, there's just this unconditional love. Sorry, did you, Adam?
I just said amazing. Yeah. Amazing. Just, I did a lot of, over the years, done a lot of searching and now I don't know if I would have heard this years back because I was always trying to get to somewhere and I was always trying to, and then I thought that was it. And then I moved to the next, but just listen. And I've become very quiet. Like I don't really need to talk and that's just, I'm finding that very peaceful, just listening. So
beautiful. Yeah.
Just listening. Yep. I probably couldn't tell you, John, exactly relay the way I can't articulate the words, what it's all about, but it's just a nice, there's nowhere to be and there's nowhere to go. And that gives me great, just peace knowing, but I know the things do come up, the anxiety still comes up and the stress, but like you were saying, if I just go with it and just rather than try and fix it, then I know it just passes and I move on to the next. And then, so it's very, very peaceful, but I know at the same time, I'm not always going to be in that peace. So just, just relaxing and whatever comes up really. And I find that quite, amazing really, that I was looking for going down all the roads of changing every few months to a different practice and, and then it just sort of clicked and there's just nowhere to be. Like I'm just going round and round and round. Like you're saying, that was all just part of it as well. And this is part of it. So sometimes I just laugh to myself and think this, I'm just going, is this insanity?
I've totally asked the same question, but does insanity feel there's something that can happen in some spirituality, which is dissociation, which says I'm not me, and because the idea of being me with all of the stuff that this human being has endured is too much, so the mental process can actually chuck the blinkers on, pull the shutters down and go, woohoo, I'm happy because don't have to deal with any of that stuff. This is totally inclusive. This is not avoiding anything. This is saying, ooh, it's almost a sensitivity for all the appearances that are happening, all the emotion, all of the traumas, all of the mental processes, the psychological suffering. It's an absolute delicate sensation of feeling those, especially the ones that are hidden, especially the ones that are subtle. And so that leaning into or inclusive feeling it feels like the opposite of dissociation. It feels like encompassing, all embracing, and all is this, and it all is okay.